This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. Hello, everyone. I'm Franklin Taggart, and this is Your Own Best Company. This is a podcast that's directed to people who love working alone, and the person that we're going to be speaking with today is Larry Kaul. He has a consulting and coaching program that I think is really going to be relevant to a lot of folks who listen to this podcast. It is called Revenue Climber, and I really am excited to hear more about that. But Larry is known for helping people get unstuck in their business to build a stable and lucrative business. And the Revenue Climber Expedition offers you rope, foothold, and support to better navigate through self-employment. To better navigate tough self-employment terrain. I read faster than my eyes could go. Larry, welcome.
Thanks, Franklin. I appreciate you having me.
Talk to me a little bit about how you got started in this direction. As I understand it, you've been self-employed for quite a long time. How is it that you ended up going in this direction with helping other people in their self-employment?
I've had a few different businesses, and I've worked for other people as well, usually straight commission. So I've always been responsible for my own income, and had to take full responsibility for figuring out how to work. So that idea of working on my own has always been there. I've never worked in a company structure, even when I was employed, where people told me what to do. So I had to create the structure for myself. And what I've learned, and I've built a couple of seven-figure businesses. I have another one right now that I have somebody running for me, and I have one that I scaled, a family business, when I was in my 20s. And what I learned, figured out over all this, is there was always something wrong. And I remember this faint longing, which sometimes became a scream in my head of, oh my God, I wish I could have just become an accountant. or a doctor, my brother, or something like this. But at the same time, this kind of overwhelming desire to build something for myself that I really care a lot about, for people that I care a lot about, but I was never able to get there.
Yeah.
And on September 20th of last year, I just had this wake up moment where I thought, this is not going to happen with the company I have right now. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I realized that what I really cared about was getting self-employment right for myself first, figuring it out. So whatever solution I put together was real and actually worked, and then turning that into a company. And that's what Revenue Climber became.
That's a great story. Tell me a little bit about what were the clues that you saw in your former business that helped you know that you were not going in the direction that you wanted to go.
You got a couple hours?
Yeah, sure. I'll edit. But,
the one in my 20s was a distribution business. We sold clothing to children's stores.
Yeah.
I hated it. But I made decent money.
Yeah.
I didn't make huge money, but I didn't care at that time. I was in my 20s. I didn't really care. But I had freedom. My freedom. I mean, I lived in Spain for a month.
Oh, yeah.
We just took off. With seasonal business. So we'd work our asses off. We'd work all the time. And then I just take off for a month. Loved that.
Yeah.
But professionally, absolutely soul crushing to work. So there's the problem. So it divides for me into personal, professional, and financial. How do I align all these three?
Right.
I go back to my other business, what's called Op Generation now. We rebranded it from Call Sales Partners. And, I was making $500,000 a year, pretty quick, when I started this thing. And I felt absolutely constantly running in this state of absolute toxic fear.
Yeah.
In that company, afraid of the clients and the decisions they were going to make, the power they had over me.
Right.
That created a problem. But I love the professional work. So there's always been an imbalance.
Yeah.
in all of these things. And if I look back, I have a lot of stories, like I said, about these imbalances. And I think the purpose of Revenue Climber is for me, to prove that it's possible to make those three things work together effectively for me, my own life, and then I believe it will work for other people.
Yeah. I think that's a common thread for a lot of folks who are self-employed, solopreneurs, and the freelancers and folks that I work with. I hear things like that a lot about, two pieces of the puzzle are fitting together really nicely, and the third one's just really becoming more and more difficult to navigate around. And so, just in September, you went ahead with the new plan and started doing Revenue Climber. Where did the idea come from for that? How did you clarify that this was what you wanted to do?
I'd always built the company around an idea, or not an idea, more of a capability.
Yeah.
I started with, this is what I know how to do, and this is what I'm good at. This time I didn't. I did it in reverse. Okay. And then I realized, oh, that was the right way. I didn't know that. So what I did was I started talking to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I figured out who shared my worldview and culture and sense of purpose and mission, people who I really wanted to be around. And that became my market. Yeah. And they told me what to build. So I built the product, and I'm still continuing to.
Yes.
So this is a methodology that I've created around how do you build your company, and how do you build your product, and how do you build your message, and how do you build everything? How do you build your social media content? You build it with your customer audience, not for them.
Yeah. That paradigm shift is becoming more and more widespread. Are you finding that as well?
It's not. I think it's becoming widespread in awareness that that is a paradigm.
Yeah.
But I don't see people doing it.
They're not making the jump yet.
No, it's this idea with everything. It's when you have a great idea, it requires you to push through fear to change and sustainable effort in a system, in a working system, with the right kind of mindset to really do it right and make that kind of change actually happen. And people don't do that. Most people won't do that. They'll give up, or they won't even start, or they'll do it in a half-baked way.
Yeah.
But this is a very uncomfortable thing to do, because what happens is you get truth from people. So I had a concept of what I wanted it to be, and it failed. So I put out a product that failed.
Yeah.
People didn't want it. Well, I was like, okay, that hypothesis was wrong. Now we go on to number 2, which worked. But is it going to be 20 before it works for somebody? It could be.
Yeah.
That requires you to deal with a lot of fear, shame, being triggered, not being right, living in a state of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that's a requirement to make this sort of a methodology work, as opposed to saying, here's what it is. Well, that's all me. That's easy.
So going back to it and approaching it then from the idea of engage first and then build, what kinds of mechanisms did you put in place for listening to the people that you were connecting with?
I didn't know this was how I was doing it when I started doing it. I just didn't know what to do. And I've always been in sales, so I know how to get meetings, and that was pretty easy. And I figured out how to use LinkedIn. And the way I did it was I watched and I paid attention to what people were doing. And I did a couple of programs, and I started to recognize how to use it. And then I tested things and just I just do things, and you just do and do and do, and things start to work. So that worked. So I started getting a lot of meetings with people. And then I developed concepts based on watching people and business models that were successful. And then I decided on a business model and a concept too early. And I said, okay, that's what I'm going to be. And I think from an outsider looking in, it probably looked very chaotic.
Yeah.
because it was.
At first it is, right?
Because I didn't have, well, it doesn't have to be though. So
Okay.
I didn't have a system. So now it's done different. I would do it differently, and I'm doing it differently. Now you make a decision about what you want that market to see you as
Yeah.
in a positioning, with a positioning thinking of one thought, one product,
Right.
one message, really, really clear. And you do that. And now I have a spreadsheet I call a customer data input sheet. And there's columns on the spreadsheet of information I'm gathering when I'm talking to people. And then I gather that information and I analyze it. And I do this with every single person I talk to. It's very disciplined
Yeah.
and it's very rigorous. And that could turn into a sales call, which I call a conversion conversation, as
Yeah.
opposed to a connection conversation. But I always start with the connection conversation, unless there's a particular reason why it should be a conversion conversation. That methodology was created out of recognizing that what I was doing was failing.
Yeah.
It worked in terms of engagement and building the connections in the audience and the visibility, but it didn't work in terms of the business model. So this is what I figured out to get to the right business model as an approach.
Yeah. So you had a growing network, but you weren't closing the sales that you needed to close, right?
I wasn't closing the sales, and I didn't even really have a clarity around the what I was converting them to.
Okay.
I think people were confused. They didn't know, even if they wanted to work with me, how. And that's part of getting to clarity in the business, is really lining all of that up. So it's obvious from the very beginning. And I'm there now, but getting the process together to get there was the big win.
As we were getting ready to go on, push the record button this morning, one of the things that we talked about was that one of the things that you really enjoy, speaking about, is what you've already referred to, and that is the necessity to create really good systems for your business. And we were kind of, in our brief conversation, we were juxtaposing that with people who kind of work from the seat of their pants and are kind of going by feelings all the time, and the consistency suffers, the continuity suffers. There really is no process involved other than however you feel in the moment. Can you talk a little bit about how did you come to the point of understanding the importance of really good systems in your business?
It came out of necessity. I'd learned in my other business that I wasn't a very good manager or leader, that I was a good visionary, and I was good at making things happen and building things, but I wasn't a particularly good leader of other people.
Yeah.
And I have this story that really tells me what that looks like, which is this idea of, I see something awesome up north. So I'm a shiny object chaser. So I see a shiny object up north. I'm like, oh, we got to go up there. And I look at everybody, I was like, come on, let's go. And I go running north, and they're like, what does he want? And somebody's like, well, he wants us to go up there. Why? I don't know. And then they come running up north, and I get up there and I'm like, it's not so great. And I look down and and I go south. And then I'm like, well, where are you all? Where are you guys? I'm south, and they're up north, and they're looking down, and they're like, you said to come up here. And I said, yeah, but I changed my mind. And they said, well, you didn't tell us. So extrapolate that into a total chaotic mess, which was how I used to work. So that's one thing. Shiny object chasing's got to stop. The second thing, now you can write down the excitement. So I have a column in my Trello of, oh, cool thing up north, write it down. And it goes into a process. The second thing that I think is really was a big revelation for me was to break what I call addiction. Addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, it's not really that big a deal for a lot of people that I know. Maybe they're in recovery or something, but what is a big deal is addiction to other people's priorities, addiction to devices, addiction to instant gratification, addiction to not having fear, wanting
Yeah.
to be in a state of happiness all the time. Those are addictions. And I think breaking those addiction cycles with a mindset practice was a big win for me, which involves tough things like getting up really early in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's how I did it. Now, people have their own ways of doing these things, but you have to have some mindset practice to keep yourself kind of on track. The third thing is just a workable system based on using a calendar the way
Yeah.
it's designed to be used. And I make appointments. There is not a minute out of the day that's not scheduled. And it sounds horrible. And I remember thinking, how could I possibly ever do that? Well, I couldn't with other people's systems.
Yes.
So I read all those books,
Yeah.
the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I was like, I can't do any of this stuff. And then the time blocking, and I'm like, I can't do any of this stuff. And then I watched myself not be able to do it. And I started to recognize what I could do. And I built that system that I could use.
Yeah.
And then I felt this incredible surge of freedom from being able to have that and to work within it. And what I did was I built a lot of flexibility into it.
So you actually have that scheduled as well, right? The
Well, the
freedom blocks.
flexibility is you shrink or expand the time blocks based on the reality of any given moment.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. And your time blocks are appointments.
Yeah.
So you don't violate the appointment ever, but you can reschedule somebody. Just don't crush them,
Yeah.
blow them off. Simple things like this made a big difference. Business strategy approach, where you figure out what's the real problem you're trying to solve. What is the way that you can solve that? What's the direction that you can go in? And what are the things you need to do to get there? And then you put that into a calendar system. The time blocks are labeled based on those actions. And then you create to-do lists based on what are in those time blocks. And a day before you work, you go in the time blocks with those broad labels and you specifically label them.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it, there's something wrong with the inputs. And then it's like, all right, we need another strategy session.
So you've referred to several things here in the process of building and creating your own system, and I'd like to ask you some questions about a couple of them at least. The first one is that you mentioned that you start your day with mindset work. Is there a specific mindset tool or practice or anything that you've found particularly helpful for yourself?
The simplest way to put it is learning how to be with yourself for a sustained period of time without distractions and recognizing your own reality, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, all of those things.
Yeah.
Every day, first thing. The way you do it, you can go for a walk.
Yeah.
I don't study meditation, but I meditate.
Yeah.
But I don't subscribe to any particular position or I happen to know how to do Tai Chi, and I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I think that gives me an advantage.
Yeah.
But I think taking a walk in the woods or down the cul-de-sac is the same thing. But the key is no devices.
Yeah.
No information, and awareness. It's awareness, seeing the reality, living in the pain or the fear if that's what comes up, living in the joy if that's what comes up. The ideas start coming, and then you move to phase 2, which is capturing the ideas.
Right. You had mentioned some of at least one of the tools that you use is Trello, and that's one that I use as well, particularly for the projects that I work on. And then you mentioned, blocking in your calendar, and filling your calendar with all of the things that need to be done and all of the things that need to not be done. It sounds like. I'm curious how you arrived at your own system. You said that you tried the other systems like the Stephen Covey system and maybe the getting things done, or
I have all the books right here. I could go pull them.
I've got them too.
So I've read all of, and none of them have ever worked for me.
Why do you think that is?
I think we need to create our own systems. I
Yeah,
think that we need frameworks. So I don't teach people in the Revenue Climber Expedition the 5 steps to anything.
yeah,
What I'm saying is this is how you create your system. These are the things that need to be included in it.
yeah,
And then there's a responsibility of customizing it for yourself, as opposed to having someone else impose it on you. I found that doesn't work for sales systems, but I read everything and I learn from everybody, and every one of those systems has brilliance in them and have dramatically helped me.
yeah. Is there one over the others that you would recommend?
Um, no, I don't think so. I
Yeah,
think there, what would the one thing? I think that the I can't claim it yet because we're still in development, but I
yeah.
think the groundbreaking accelerator for this whole thing I'm talking to you about is going to be agile development.
Okay.
We are building a agile development working process using the same approaches to creating ideas and developing those ideas into tangible outputs
Yeah.
that software engineers use, that software engineering teams use, using a sprint, weekly time boxed sprint methodology. And I'm working with someone who really is very, very good at doing that.
Yeah.
I think that approach will be the killer app. I'm already seeing that happening with how I'm developing the company, because what it allows me to do all of a sudden is not only develop things in one comprehensive system myself. It's really amazing how it works. I didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
How do you develop software? It's impossible for me to even conceptualize that. And I'm like, they know how to work. They know how to get stuff done. The problem is their clients and like the boss.
Yeah.
those people get anything done. So using that approach effectively is going to be a big part, I think, of taking this to the next level. And then my answer would be that it would be agile software development methodologies applied to developing, working for yourself. But the other piece of this I think is really important is that if you do that right, you can plug in people on Upworks or Fiverr or any of these systems that are reasonably good.
Yeah.
And they'll be incredibly effective. The problem with hiring those kinds of people is you bring them into your own confusion.
Yeah.
And then you think, oh, that person wasn't any good or they couldn't get it done. It's like, no, you have a terrible process and you just brought them into this complete mess.
Yeah.
Of course they did a bad job. So I think developing the agile system allows you to plug in resources, which is going to be a big deal for people who want more time.
Yes.
So then you can start to recognize, oh, I don't have to do, I call them rocks in the shoes. So it's called, I'm going to go one more thing here and then go back to questions. Task engineering. Task engineering is something I started doing whenever I felt a rock in my shoe, which means basically, oh my God, I have to do this. It's so irritating. And then instead of doing it, I'd sit down and think, okay, what is this really? And then I'd realize, it's like writing a macro in an application. And basically, I have to write a little custom thank you for the thing email. Why don't I just write it as a template and throw it up in a task engineering column in Trello? All I have to do is cut and paste it and then say, okay, change this and change that. The rock is gone. Content production, do an hour video.
Yeah.
Dump that video right into, we're using Otter because they're the best transcription service we found. The other ones are terrible. And Otter's actually pretty damn good. And then that triggers a zap to a editor kind of person. Well, there's an automatic editing system first, and then you can have an editor come in and mark posts out of it.
Yeah.
And then I can go in and approve posts, and I get alerted, an automatic alert. I can go in and say, okay, I want those posts. You want it up on Twitter? There's a system called Hype Fury
Yeah.
that'll create a Twitter thread out of a post. Boom, boom, boom. Throws it back to the freelancer, $10 an hour, whatever. They'll go through and make sure it's spaced out correctly, throw it back to you. You approve, schedule, send. All of a sudden, and you can do this with a TikTok video, you can take a clip, put it into the TikTok format. If you engineer the tasks, you build the process, and you have a system around it. Think about the freedom of that if you're self-employed. All of a sudden, you got this company behind you cranking out all this stuff.
Yeah.
But you're not out of it. You can't outsource that. You have to still be in it, but the rocks are out of your shoes.
Yeah, you don't have to do the whole thing. You're bringing in help where help can help.
Where help can help, and that's cheaper too.
I think so too. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of folks like me who do like working alone. I'm also a big fan of DIY because I just really enjoy the learning process. But that sometimes gets me in trouble in terms of my time management and getting the right things done at the right time.
Let me talk about that a little bit, because I don't disagree with DIY. I think it's actually really smart.
Yeah.
The problem is, why are you still doing it once you've figured it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the time, I figure it out and then I'm done with it, and I very rarely go back unless I'm teaching somebody else how to do it.
So I think for me, figuring it out and then putting it into a system and a process, so someone else can actually go through and do the steps, is the right way to do it, because you are the only person who can figure it out. So you know the nuances of you and your company. And if you bring somebody else into it in the right way within a scheduled process, you get to have that thing that you've figured out. What I used to do is I'd go figure it out. Everything else would get dropped because I chased my new shiny object. And then I would figure it out, and then I'd get bored and not want to do it anymore. And it would be gone. It would go away.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't there, to help me. Or I'd hire somebody to help me with it, and they couldn't do it. And I'd be like, why can't I find anybody any good?
Yeah. You're singing my tune. And I think a big part of it is the figuring out that I'm doing now mostly is to help my clients, flatten and speed up their own learning curve. So I can kind of get them to where they need to go a little bit more quickly. The other question, you had just started to talk a little bit about strategy at the end of what you had presented with systems, and I'm a little bit curious about you talked about your capture mechanisms, but how then does that become strategy?
I start with what one of the big revelations to me was to use the scientific method for development of strategy as opposed to the idea method.
Yeah.
So coming up with an idea is great, but it's a hypothesis. And taking that hypothesis and making sure it's fully understood, and then capturing data against it, is the beginning of that. The data analysis piece, for me, becomes intuitive, and no one else can do it. I can't outsource that. I'm the only one who can see the data because I'm the one who had all the conversations, and I'm the only one who really understands my market. You can't outsource that to a strategist or a management consultant.
Yeah,
it's not going to work. Once I see in the data, for example, with my company, the kinds of things people call themselves. So who's my customer? So I make up these terms: self-employed, professional. Is it a solopreneur? Is it a business owner? Is it a what? Well, I said, I don't know. So I stopped debating, and I have a column called description. I'm talking to people and I'm writing down what they call themselves. And I looked back and I was like, oh, I work for myself. They're the I work for myself. They're not solopreneurs.
Yeah.
Nobody said solopreneur. Nobody ever
Nobody
said
knows that word.
solopreneur. They don't even know what it is. And nobody ever said CEO, and nobody ever said small business owner. Nobody said self-employed professional, which is what I had settled on is the right answer.
Yeah.
They said I work for myself. So now when people ask me what I do, I said I run an expedition for professionals who work for themselves.
Very good.
Those little details really matter.
Oh, yeah.
They have massive impact, massive, massive impact. Marketers know this. Consumer products marketers are making huge decisions off very, very little nuanced details. Sweat those details. And I'm saying we need to sweat those details as well.
Yeah. What it sounded like when you were talking about, collecting all the data and then analyzing it is like, what occurred to me as you were talking is that not only do you have a sense of the data, but you have a sense of how it's embodied, because you've done the contact. You've had the real world interaction that informs the data, and can be reflected that. And that's not, I don't know a good way to share that with another human being in a way that they can come up with the same conclusions that you would. All right.
I think we have to know what our jobs are.
Yeah.
I think the misunderstanding often is my job is to do the thing that I do. And it's not really your job. But you don't have to become a salesperson, or you don't have to become a market researcher, but you have to embody the elements of those things that you have to do. You have to be the front person of your company. You have to be the public personality, whether you like it or not. You've got to learn how to speak on camera.
Yeah.
You have to. It's not an option. You don't like it, learn it, how to do it. You have to learn how to write. You have to learn how to promote yourself in a way you're comfortable with, but you got to know how to get out there. You have to learn how to conduct a sales interview.
Yeah.
Or a connection networking conversation to build a strategic partnership. Those are required skills that you have to learn how to do. And you're the only one. But you have to have a methodology to do it, and you have to customize it based on your own personality and what you're comfortable with. And you have to free up your time so you have time to do it, or you will not succeed.
That brings me to ask questions now more specifically about the Revenue Climber Expedition. When you bring someone into that program, tell me where they are when you find them.
They are where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a concept that I learned about from a marketer that I follow. I forget what he calls it, but I liked using the term of a catalyst or motivator. Mm-hmm. So this idea in sales training is people buy because they're in pain. So you have to uncover the pain.
Yeah.
And you speak to the pain. I don't agree with that. What you do is you uncover the catalyst motivators that are typical in your industry, because there's a few of them typically, and they're shared in common by everybody in your target market pool. And you discover them by asking people as part of the conversation to get the data in, right? And what I found for me is that the people who are really good fit for me tend to be doing okay with their confidence around their expertise. So there's a feeling of, I do know what I'm doing, and I'm pretty good at it, and I'm doing okay, and I'm feeling that I got something here, and I'm rolling along, But there's this fatigue around spending money with things that don't work. So I noticed that most of the people I've talked to, where it's gone anywhere with me, have some stories that I bring out in them, because I have a column in my data input called experiences. Mm-hmm. That's why I know everything about my market. I know more about my market than anybody else, because everyone is telling me who they're buying from, what they paid, and the results they got from it. I get all that information. I know all the networking events. I know where everybody goes because they're telling me. And then I'm getting introduced to all those people too. So I end the call with getting introductions. So I'm moving through these networks as part of this, what I call a connection conversation. So that data comes in and I can look at it and I can recognize that for me, they're where they are, but there's a common theme around that catalyst motivator where they're just like, I know it's not quite right because usually money, maybe professional satisfaction, maybe personal issues around time and things like this. But usually there's a money component,
Yeah.
I would say. And the catalyst motivator comes most often after they're looking for solution, but they're starting to notice they keep buying things that don't work.
Yeah.
So they want to hear something totally different. And I come in and I'm speaking a different language deliberately than everybody else. So it sounds different to them, which I believe it is.
Yeah.
And that connects me as call it a bridge. So this comes from 1960s, Eugene Schwartz.
Yeah.
So the bridge is that catalyst motivator where there's a desire issue of some sort with a destination that they want, and I'm providing that bridge. So connecting into that conversation with the right stories is a really important piece.
How do they get to the moment of knowing that this is the right direction for them?
It's trust. So one of the things that I think is important is to create a way for people to get to know you.
Yeah.
And this is the beauty of social media. I've had people tell me, man, I read that Twitter thread you wrote about your history, and I have it pinned up on my Twitter. And they're like, that's amazing. They know me.
Yeah.
Or they saw some videos, or they listened to a podcast like this. And this is what I'm encouraging people to do is get out there, but get out there in a coherent way. So know your stories, know what you want to talk about and who you're talking to specifically. But don't spend too long figuring that out. If you don't know, make it up. Spend about a day on the strategy.
Yeah.
Go, pay attention, collect the data, and then spend a couple more days on the strategy. You do these things in parallel and you're going to get somewhere, but you have got to get out in the market because people have to feel comfortable with you. That way I don't have to sell anything. You know, people decide, they're like, I trust this guy. They either trust me or they don't.
Yeah.
And most people don't trust so easily. And I don't blame them because it's not hard to find someone who can talk a good game.
Yeah.
But over month after month, I run an event. I have a private community group that I run. I show up at a lot of places and people will start feeling a sense of being comfortable. And that's how buying decisions get made. It's people will not take a risk with an unknown, even if that unknown seems better. They're going to buy something they're familiar with, and you can become familiar, which I guess is the point of this. There's easy ways to become familiar.
If people are starting to hear something in what you're saying and they're saying, I really need to investigate more, let's talk about where they need to go next.
Well, I run something, I call it a start session. And the idea of the start session is just 30 minutes. And I help somebody identify where they are in their own mind right now, the minefield as they see it, as they're moving towards the destination they want to reach, and where any particular blockers are. And then I will tell them complimentary without charging them what I think they can do, which is not join my thing, but it's learn how to do this particular thing. And you can figure that out, or you can join my thing, if you want. So that's the 30-minute start session. And to get to that, you would just go to revenueclimber.com.
revenueclimber.com. And I'm also going to encourage people to follow you on LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn page has a lot of really great stuff on it. And your activity on LinkedIn, I think, is something that people could look at as an example for their own use of that particular platform. Are there other social media platforms where you would encourage people to find you?
I'm really liking Twitter right now, and I'm in an early stage of it, but I'm very active on it. So I spend some time there.
Very good. The last thing I'd like to ask you in closing is if you were starting out again at the very beginning of your self-employment career, what would you tell yourself knowing what you know now?
I wish it could be this way. Um, I would tell myself that start and stay with your start until you get information,
Yeah.
tangible information that sends you in a different direction. You don't have to whiteboard it
Okay.
by yourself in a room.
Yeah, it doesn't have to all be on one piece of paper before you actually take
Market,
action.
the answer is out there
Yeah.
and inside. You need to connect those two things together. And the only way to do that is with action and actually talking to people and letting them talk.
Well, Larry, I appreciate that information and that insight. You've really brought a lot of great value to myself and to the folks who listen to this morning. And I wish you all the best with your new direction. It sounds like a very positive step for you.
Thanks, Franklin. I really appreciate it.
So, folks, again, if you're looking to find out more about what Larry's up to, revenueclimber.com is the great place to go. And you can find him again on LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you want to find more episodes of this particular podcast, you can listen on your favorite podcast platform. I'm also on YouTube and always at my website, franklintaggart.com. And I appreciate you listening. I'm going to encourage you, if you enjoy this particular program, let us know about it. Subscribe, review, share. All of that is appreciated very much. We'll see you around. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company. If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.